Hi, Blair. We're so happy to have you. Thanks for coming, kind of.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So we'll probably have you start with your background, a little bit about your education, a little bit about your current career, maybe any roadblocks or anything that came up, and then I'll get to student questions.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So, yeah, I started school at San Diego State. Woo! um, and I think I knew I wanted to do psychology, but I didn't know like exactly which route I wanted to go through. But I did start with the bachelor's knowing I wanted to do grad school. And so it was just a matter of like figuring out which one was best for me. And I kind of knew I wanted to do clinical work, but yeah, figuring out like which route that was going to go. Really just like I feel like I tried on so many different hats and went down those paths. And then just the timing of the path that I had at the time of graduation was the path that I went down. And I think it kind of just works like that sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I did bachelor's at San Diego State, worked in the undergrad advising office with Cassie, um, and that really just opened my eyes. I'm sure just like when you go in there, there's so many options to so many resources to learn about all the different careers. It's a shout out to the advising office. If you haven't been, check it out. And so I had studied abroad in high school in Spain. So I knew I wanted to do like somehow collaborate Spanish, international work, but in undergrad that just didn't really pan out really well. I did a minor in Spanish and thought about studying abroad, but then in my mind, I guess I just wanted to get grad school out of the way so I could kind of, start doing that after. So I took the quick path. So I'm for the next few years, I'll probably be the youngest on my team at work.
Graduated in 3 years, right?
Yeah, so I graduated my bachelor's in 3 years and then went to grad school for 2 years. And then now I am in my first year of clinical work and I am 24. So that definitely, I mean, just in clinical work, that definitely shows up in the room that, kids ask me probably like once a week how old I am. So I made that decision early on. I knew it was going to be rough, but I've just gotten used to it. And so then after I was doing my bachelor's, I wanted to work with like crisis work. I knew I liked fast pace, maybe like hospital setting or school setting or something that's just kind of more milieu versus outpatient. So like I was in their setting versus somebody coming to my setting.
Yeah.
And so that's really important to me just because I think it's important to like meet them where they're at, and the therapy and the treatment can be so much more effective that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew trauma was going to be somehow incorporated into my career. And so when I started looking into programs, my last year of my bachelor's, I was originally looking into doctorates, but took the GRE and quickly realized that was not in the cards for now. And
Now they're getting rid of it in most places.
oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's great for them because I'd say every psychology student I've talked to, the thing that holds them back from like succeeding is the math section on the GRE.
Yeah. Because it has nothing to do with anything you've learned the past like 4 years.
No, and it takes so much time to study for it and relearn all that math. And it just like, people will do great on all the other sections. And then because the math, they can't get into the grad school they want to get to. So it's just, I would suggest, yes, I did tutoring. I did a class, I did a GRE class. And then I got the 50th percentile, which is like pretty standard, I think, for master's programs. Yeah. I'd say pretty standard for the things that I saw. So that kind of dictated me going to a master's. But looking into this, I was looking into PsyDs because I knew I didn't want to do research. I wanted to do clinical only. I found one at University of Denver, and I had family here, and just I knew my priorities list, that where I wanted to live was like one of the top ones, just because even if it was the best program ever, I couldn't see myself living in like a place that I wouldn't be happy. So
I think that's really important to consider too. Like, it's not always just about the school and where you go. It's a lot about where can you see yourself living for a while.
yeah, well, and especially like where can you see yourself like integrating into the field? Because um yeah, if I had gone to like I don't know, some small rural place and there's only one or two, mental health opportunities, you just don't get as much exposure. So that is one thing about like living in cities and going to school in cities is there's tons of community mental health centers here in Denver. Yeah, a few different doctorates. So with the more grad schools come more resources, I found too. So
absolutely.
yeah, so that was so I was looking into the doctorate, found some professors, was like reading into like just kind of reading on their website about different professors. And this was also something that I knew I wanted to do because I'll just be like transparent, my GPA for undergrad was 3.5 and then my GRE was 50th percentile. So it was pretty like, I'd say average, a little bit above average maybe. And so I knew that I wasn't, and I didn't have a ton of clinical experience. So I knew I wasn't going to stick out. So I took it upon myself to reach out to a lot of the professors and the dean of the program and just sent emails and met with them in person because I was visiting Denver. But I think, a Zoom meeting like this would have been totally fine too. Just to show them like that I was interested and, read up on the program and dropped in buzzwords when I was talking to them, in the meeting, things that I found on the website, just to show them that I was really interested. And I think that that really like put my name towards the top of the list. So I think that's a really good suggestion for people looking into grad school is like reach out to as many people, make meetings. I don't even know if they necessarily even like really remembered me when I started the program, if they remembered me or not, but like my name was at least kind of in their head.
Yeah. And it always, like, even when I talk to students about applying for research, like you should have at least read the publication or something prior to asking someone for their lab. The same thing with college. Like you need to know their mission statement, their goals of the program, and you need to address those when you're applying to go there, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, and find like find the things that are important to that program and highlight those and make sure that they're important to you,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I was looking into their a lot of the professors' backgrounds, and a lot of them had a lot of international experience. So I started contacting one professor there, and her name is Dr. Gwen Mitchell, and she was in Doctors Without Borders for like 10 years and did clinical work. She's been on like so many different missions around the world. And so once I started emailing with her, she actually suggested the master's in international disaster psychology. And once I started looking into that, I saw that it was a 2-year program. In between your first and second year, you get to go abroad for the summer, do work there. And so once I found all that, it just kind of like clicked perfectly. Like that's exactly what I wanted to do. And it set up, I saw one of the questions was like, if I could still do clinical work. So that was the thing about the program is it was basically had the bare bones for a clinical program. And then additionally had other classes on top of it, like global mental health classes, public health, disaster mental health, like what it looks like, for example, when COVID started, what did it look like for the government mental health sector to, I guess, like start services and interventions? Like, what does that chain of command look like? So those classes, normal clinical programs wouldn't have you take, but we got that kind of macro view as well. So,
and I think one of the first people that I talked about like vicarious trauma and first responders and stuff. And like, I thought that was so interesting. I never even really had thought about it at the time of advising, but yeah. And I'm sure that's something they're really experiencing right now.
Yeah. And so that's one thing that it really highlights too, is it, it's really because I think the professors have been exposed to some really intense trauma, like international war zones and stuff. They just put that at like the top of their list of something to teach. That, like, I mean, I in grad school I probably made like 3 or 4 different care plan or self-care plans that were assignments for school, and things like that that they incorporated in there. And that to me like showed just that like they were being really realistic about it. You know, they weren't glossing over that like clinical work and trauma work is so fun and great and butterflies and roses. And you know, they were very realistic about like it's very, very hard work, especially working with kids that have, you know, been through trauma and been through complex trauma.
Yeah.
And these are the things that you're going to have to do to be able to survive in this field.
Yeah, for sure. That's so wild.
Yeah.
So cool. So let's see.
Well, so let me just, I can kind of just my transition from grad school here. So, yeah, well, so I only applied to one grad school because I knew I wanted to go to that one. So that was different than some people that apply to a few different clinical programs. My thought was like, if I don't get in here first time, I think I'm just going to take a year off and apply again because I really do want to go to this program.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that was important to me. Ended up getting in, did the full 2 years, and then graduated in June. And I got my job probably like a week before I graduated. And I applied to community mental health jobs here. Just they're pretty much the only people that hire unlicensed therapists. If you're unlicensed, you can't get on paneling boards for insurance. You can only take Medicaid clients, and so that's also why community mental health mostly takes Medicaid clients.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so then Aurora Mental Health, they had a school-based team, so that worked out with me wanting to work with kids. So that's how I transitioned there.
So are you planning to get licensed or? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor candidate, LPC, licensed professional counselor candidate, LPCC. So those are the letters behind my name. So I have to do 2,000 hours of supervised clinical work, which basically means that I work by myself. I mean, it's not supervised by any means, but I see my clinical supervisor once a week for an hour. So whether that be like, I mean, it's just kind of like telling her about difficult things that I'm experiencing or difficult cases that I'm having that I need to kind of talk through. So yeah, so then once I do that for 2 years, I have to take a test, the NCE, the National Counselor Exam, and then I can be licensed. So
exciting.
Mm-hmm. Gosh. Yeah, so that was my plan with international work, is like get licensed, and then after that, because you have to get licensed within 5 years of graduating, and so everybody that worked internationally just told me, like, just go get licensed, don't worry about it, and then after that your job prospects will open up a ton. So
that's cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and just to clarify that this 2 years, it is paid. Like, it's not paid as much as if you were clinical, but it is still like a full-time job.
Oh, that's awesome. And did you get any stipends in your program or?
No. So because I was in what I'm thinking is like the more clinical programs, it's harder to find stipend situations just because there's not research to do. So like my department, so you know how there's like the College of Sciences and then the Department of Psychology. So my department was the Department of Professional Psychology, Graduate School of Professional Psychology. So it was, since it's professional psychology, there's like no research, and it only had grad students. So there was also no teaching opportunities either. Yeah. So no, not a lot of opportunities. Just, I mean, student loans.
Yeah, right. Which is for master's programs in general. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's just something that, like, unfortunately in this country, you just have to bite the bullet if you want to go to grad school. A lot of the times, like, and undergrad, you just have to pay a lot.
Exactly.
So But I mean, I am hoping to do the public service loan forgiveness
Oh, that's
program. Yeah. So if I pay 10 years of my student loans, work for nonprofit, which is pretty much anywhere except for like private practice, really, then I can get my loans forgiven. So
that's awesome. That's a really cool thing.
yeah.
Provide that as a resource. Thank you.
Sure.
Let's.
Yeah.
So I'll start with some of the student questions and kind of go in order from like advice to questions about your path, questions about education, and then questions about career. I did my best to organize them, but they may overlap on some level. But anyway, so what are some key lessons you learned that guided you to becoming a clinical therapist?
I mean, I think that like the lesson for like grad school was the big one was like reaching out and making yourself known, getting your name out there for sure. I would say try to go like try to experience different things. Like I went to San Diego State, which is obviously huge, and then my grad program only had 20 people in it, and so we took all of our classes together. Like they basically told us every schedule for every quarter that we had to take. So it was a cohort model like that. And so I was really glad that I got opportunities to see what it's like to be in a 500 person class and a 20 person class. And I guess just like how my student personality comes out in those two situations. So
Absolutely. It is
yeah,
interesting from like 500 to like seminar based classes where you're expected to talk to everybody and it's like,
yeah. And I did find in my program, most people went to small like liberal arts schools and stuff, not a lot of like big universities like San Diego State. So it's okay.
So now to move kind of into like some cultural information. So why is it important for psych students to have a good understanding of multiculturalism when wanting to work in like mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like one of the most important things that I wish I learned earlier on in psychology was just like the prestige that kind of comes with mental health in our world and our I don't know, it's obviously very accessible for people that have private insurance and that are better off, but and those are the people that are going to understand what therapy is when they come into the room. They're going to sit down, they're going to understand therapy is me talking about my feelings and my emotions, whereas you know the majority of everybody else that aren't those people, just the experience of therapy is completely different than what we have in our Western view. And I think it's also important to respect that just because something works for our you know, individualistic culture and our Western culture, we definitely can't assume that it's going to work for somebody else. And I think it can be kind of classist in a way to assume that it will work for everybody. So it's important for us to, I guess, just go into a room like open-minded and meet the client where they're at. And if that means taking 5 sessions, like doing the basics of therapy, then that's what it is.
Absolutely, because you can't assume, I mean, like you think about all the stigma in certain cultures, so even the fact that they showed up is a huge feat, and then you have to consider the traditions and values of that culture when approaching like these sensitive types topics. Yeah, absolutely.
And just even talking about, you know, like mental health symptoms, like we think of, you know, if someone has hallucinations and delusions, then they have schizophrenia, right? But if somebody in another culture, if they have hallucinations and delusions, they are being connected with their spiritual leaders.
Yeah, right.
And
Like
we can't go in and say there's something wrong with them.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. And kind of on that note, so someone asked, like, what exactly do you mean mold treatment to the culture of the client? So kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think really like what I mean by that is just like going in open-minded and not going in with your own agenda. Um, and really just like trying to assess like, am I, make sure that you're like, I don't know, giving space in the room for them to express themselves, especially in a culture that like I am of the majority race and other people, you know, if somebody else isn't, realizing that that can show up in the room and show up in the therapy room, and being able to mold what you're doing and saying to the person that's sitting in front of you. It could be someone, you know, could be a middle-aged white man versus a, you know, 18-year-old Latina woman. And those are how you speak to somebody, how you approach therapy, how you build rapport. Those are all going to be, it's going to be completely different. And if I, you know, if I think it's really important to focus on the past in my therapy, however I find a client and they say my past is just too, it's too sensitive right now, I can't go there, then I need to change my therapy. It's not okay for me to push it onto them because that's how I like to do therapy.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of misconceptions, and we've kind of talked about this with another speaker, is that therapy involves giving advice to help guide them. But really, that can make someone kind of liable. So could you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's different too with kids versus adults. That's a big difference. Like with adults, I've had a few adult clients in grad school, and yeah, it's just it's you're telling them like basically what works for me should work for you, and that's just not the case. And so I think just what our job is like to find patterns in the way that in the things that they're saying, to reflect things back, to, you know, support and you know, guide if guide with what they have said in the, you know, in previously, like they'll say this is what I want to do, and then you can help them to where they want to go. But if you're trying to give them advice, then essentially you're kind of getting them to the place that you want them to go.
Exactly.
And if, you know, even if I think they're ready, they still might not be ready. And so but that definitely comes up, especially definitely with kids a lot. They'll ask me like, well, what do you think I should do with this friend situation? Do you think I should talk to him? Do you think I should talk to her? And, you know, I think there, with some things with kids, you know, I think it's okay to kind of be like, you know, I don't know if that's the best idea if it involves safety issues and stuff. But as far as like, you know, non-safety issues, like I do the same thing with the kids of like, well, what do you think? What do you think would happen if we did that?
What would happen in this alternative route?
Yeah.
Which one?
And
yeah.
yeah, and I'm a big fan of like just kind of saying what I'm feeling too in the room. And so I'll be like, you know, I'm wondering why that would even be a good option, and or I'm wondering, I have this feeling that I'm wondering that like I've never heard you say that before. Why now? And so just kind of getting curious instead of trying to tell them something.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely important. So next question, where does your passion come from in terms of your desire to work with marginalized individuals and groups?
I mean, I think that, I don't know, I think that like altruism is just really important to me. And I feel, I mean, in grad school, you know, you talk a lot about privilege and privilege that you've been given and all that. And so I think that I've, you know, been given privileges that a lot of people haven't, is just as far as like my education and things like that. And I feel that because of that, it's my responsibility to share that with people that don't have those same opportunities. Yeah, and so I think, and that was one way that like I was able to kind of cope with understanding white privilege and privilege in general, is like, okay, do I just stop in this like guilt of privilege, or what can I do with this? What can I use this for?
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Mhm.
I know people get annoyed when it's like people are saying now check your privilege, but I mean, especially in any social behavioral science, you really do, because if you don't, you're going to come at each client with your privileged background, and you really can't do that. Like
Yeah.
you kind of
Yeah, you're not going to have a lot of clients come back. So,
yeah, for sure. And then I also, before I forget, so there is a question about like what kind of classes you recommend taking for someone interested in this. And then you also mentioned taking Spanish. So do you think someone who's interested in international work or working with underserved populations like should have a language background?
I mean, I think that it will always help. I my team is probably about like 45 or 50 people on the school-based team, and I think that there's probably maybe like 10 Spanish speakers. And yeah, I mean, I'm asked like weekly if I can do translations for people. It's really, I'd say probably maybe 60 to 75% of my kids' parents don't speak English. So it's obviously very possible. I mean, there's a reason why there's interpreters and stuff, but I have found for myself, it's just been so convenient not having to go through an interpreter just to make a small, a phone call about a schedule or something.
Absolutely.
So it will always give you an upper hand. I mean, especially community mental health, in big cities, San Diego being one of them with refugee populations. If you can speak Nepali or Burmese or, some of these other Farsi or Arabic or some of these other languages that aren't common, then I mean, jobs will be handed to you in the community mental health field.
I'm so mad at myself for taking Italian. I'm like, when will I do this ever? I won't. It's like, why did you do that?
Well, they're kind of in distress right now. I bet it would be helpful right now.
Yes, but I can't go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was, so language is really helpful, but also like if you can't, I mean, I don't think it's required, but like
Yeah.
multiculturalism classes, like just, I don't even know. I wish I took more classes like that in undergrad. Just like, I don't know, like culture. I don't even know what maybe more like Chicana studies or Africana studies.
Africana, yeah.
hmm More of those classes might have like opened my eyes up to that a little bit earlier. Whereas like grad school was a big eye opener.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I definitely like one of the things for me when I was going through like all my history electives, I was like, I'm gonna do like one Native American, one African, and then one Chicano. Because I just think like, I don't know, after 12 years of the same history and it doesn't change, sorry, I'm gonna go off on a tangent. I hate history. I needed, something different that would also potentially aid going forward if I become a clinician. We'll see.
yeah.
But
Well, and I think as a clinician, as a person in this field, like you have dedicated yourself to
mhm.
learning more about that. I think it's our responsibility to take those classes, to go out of our way to learn about that, because we can't have a client that comes in who's Native American and sit there and say, okay, so we have 50 minutes. Can you explain your culture to me for the next 50 minutes? Because that's not therapy for them. That just became therapy for me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, teach me about you so I can help you. Like,
Yeah,
no.
which is, yeah, we always discuss like, that line of like getting curious about someone's culture and wanting to learn more versus like, when does it become my responsibility to go out of my way and learn more and not just ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, my nose itches. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So, did you maybe either at SDSU or in your graduates program, because you did talk about like networking, reaching out, was there any like, how did you utilize mentors, or like, did you have anyone undergrad that you really went to, or did you really find or hone in on your mentors in graduate school?
Yeah, I have to say, like, I feel like I've never been great at I've always been jealous of other people that have that like really strong mentor relationship with one person. And I've never really had that. However, I would say like once or twice a week in grad school, I would take, 10 minutes after class and just talk to the professor about like, hey, when you said that, like, what do you think about this, this, and this? Or even just like, oh, hey, I was going to tell you about this weird case I had at my field study, like,
Yeah.
um, and so I don't think it needs to be that like one relationship with that one mentor who's going to get them into grad school, get them a job, and get them whatever. I think like little relationships everywhere that I have found to be really helpful. Like even at San Diego State, like with my professors, like I think they knew me a little bit more than they knew other people,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't see them every few days.
Yeah.
It was, it was like I would ask them if I needed things, or like if somebody had something, I read something about them that was super interesting, I would definitely go and, stroke their ego a little bit to get them to like me and be like, wow, that's so cool you did that.
Yeah, if you guys don't know, if I haven't said this before, almost all professors have a higher than average level of narcissism. So you tell them they're cool or did cool, they will talk to you, and you
You're like,
will
you want this
be
book that I actually wrote? Yeah.
exactly, absolutely.
And then you go to grad school and you realize it's everybody that goes to school here too.
Yeah.
The doctorate students, you could always tell like the doctorate students versus the master's level students.
But anyways, they suck. Just kidding.
Jealous they got in and I didn't, okay?
Yeah. And then, so before getting into like graduate school, etc., what things were you involved in that you think really helped you kind of get into graduate school? Because you mentioned kind of having, maybe higher than average grades, but not a great GRE. And then how did you get involved in those types of programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the advising office was huge. And I think that it was the advising office for me, but I think it could have been any office on campus that I kind of like found a home in. It's not like I love college advising or anything. Like I'm not ever going to do that again in my life. But it was just that like it was somewhere I felt comfortable, and there was a professor that worked in there that I could ask random questions to. And I think it helps being surrounded by a lot of people. I mean, everybody in that office was also wanting to go to grad school. And so being surrounded by a lot of people that are like always talking about that and always, encouraging each other. And like every year it would be the different cohort that would kind of graduate. And, each year is like the spring would come around and everyone started asking all the questions. So whether that be the it could have been like the counseling office, at the health center, whatever that thing's called, or the advising office or regular advising office, it could have been anything like that. But just somewhere that you are surrounded by people that have the same goals.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely was helpful because then like for me as a transfer student and being in there, like I wasn't going to get to know people in my 500 student lecture hall. So like I then met other people that I was like, oh my gosh, we're in classes together. Like this is going to be really helpful in being able to talk about different things and where each of our paths are leading. And then you have this ongoing network too. Like we now have like where everyone went to grad school, and we can be like, oh, that person might be a good resource for me, and we have this connection now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really helpful since I was graduating, or I was going to school and applying at the same time for grad school. A lot of my like friend group outside of the advising office, I don't think any of them were going to grad school.
Yeah,
same. So it's really hard to be around them all the time that are like, I mean, of course, everyone wants to go out and everyone wants to do all these fun things. And then you're wanting to like, needing to study for the GRE. And it's a lot harder than when you're surrounded by people that are also doing the same thing. So I think that's a really helpful thing.
I agree, for sure. And then what about like, so you worked in the International Rescue Committee?
So I don't think, what are you talking about? At San Diego State?
It wasn't, didn't you volunteer is it the IRC?
Oh. I volunteered. Well, I did I did, what did I do out there? I worked for like a refugee
Yeah.
organization for, that was for, what's the psych, the field placement class? Is it 495?
I
It's
know,
good.
right?
um, yeah, so I did, I worked in El Cajon and I worked with this woman who was like, I think she had an MSW and she did like refugee, like, I don't even know, consulting. It wasn't clinical, but it was like
Yeah.
support. And that was cool. I mean, that was really helpful just being exposed to different cultures and that was working and then working with refugees in grad school. One thing that was really helpful for that was just like the exposure to trauma that like it feels weird to say that that's helpful, but like being exposed to more and more, like you're able to handle it way more. And so especially discussing it with like very very resilient 15-year-old kids,
Yeah.
it was just really helpful that way.
That is so cool. So, all right, now moving into graduate school, etc. So, what does a degree in international disaster psychology cover? We kind of touched on what made you interested in it and how you prepared, but like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's basically just like trying to make it a little bit it's like a little bit wider than like a clinical degree where it's like you can go clinical if you want to,
Yeah.
or you can go like macro level if you want to. So really it's like studying like disaster zones and working in like international development mixed with mental health.
Yeah.
So like how do you develop a mental health clinic in a country that is in the middle of a war, and how do you train, how do you find people in the community that are like key stakeholders, what they call them, and then how do you train people that can be the therapists, and then they can train other people, and they then train the trainers, so then you can leave and it can be a sustainable clinic. So that is like the gist of it. But then also like if you want to go, a few people go and do their doctorate after, because it is gives you that international, like that really different piece than a lot of other people applying to doctorates. But yeah, but like kind of like to set you up working with like Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. So when in grad school did you go to Nepal, and kind of like what was something valuable from that experience? How did it help you grow professionally? What was difficult about it?
Yeah, it was. So I went, like I said, in between first and second year, everybody went abroad. So we had 20 people in the program, and in like sets of two, we went to, I don't even know how many, 10 countries, something like that around there. So there were a few people that were alone, but our program has like agreements and relationships with different mental health organizations around the world. Some of them are like in Serbia and work with refugee populations out there. One was like working at a university in Peru or in Chile. We had a few people in Sri Lanka that were doing working in the working with like the rebel, like there was like a rebel force a few years, like I think, 10, 15 years ago. So they were doing like trauma work with people that were survivors. So I got chosen to go to Nepal because I wanted to work with kids, and my professors knew that.
Did you get to choose, or you just kind of filled out something?
Yeah, we put a list. We like put a list together, and then they picked people that would like be good because of the group, like the people together, and then also the job itself. So yeah, I put Nepal as like my top one because of the kids, and also because I wanted to go somewhere that was safe enough that I could be by myself and like walk around by myself.
Yeah.
And Nepal is like relatively very safe. As safe as any other big city.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I decided to do that, and it was a really, really great experience. So it was basically, I worked at a residential facility for boys in Nepal. That's a huge issue because there was a a communist revolution, and people like lived up in the mountains. They would send their kids to the cities because rebel forces were coming and taking kids as soldiers. So instead of that, people were convinced to send their kids to the cities and so they could get education there and stuff. But then, I mean, these were little kids, and obviously there's a lot of corruption. People would say they were bringing them there, but they really wouldn't. And so because of that, there's a lot of kids like begging on the streets. And then also it's like kind of become a systematic issue that like people use these kids in a way that turn it into like somebody will kind of own these kids, and the kids go out and get money and bring it back, and it's this really corrupt issue. So the place that I worked at, there was a short-term place where they would take kids for up to like 3 months, and they would work on getting the kids like off of drugs and like cigarettes and things. And sniffing glue was a huge drug there that they would do. Because I guess like people would make shoes on the streets, and so there'd just be like bottles of like super glue. And so they would go through that. And then obviously like, I mean, their behaviors were just very, like some antisocial behaviors and like inability to connect with others. And so kind of just like rehabilitating them and getting them to be able to connect and feel safe again. And then once they're kind of based like low levels of safety are kind of met, then they can go to the long-term place and they can live there for like 2 years with the idea that they're going to work with the family and rehabilitate the family so that the kid can go live with them as they're working with the kid to get their behaviors under control. So, and why I say like the behaviors is just because that's like the overt stuff that you see. Obviously there's a lot of mental health, psychological issues going on, but in Nepal, they just, because of the lack of education and understanding, they really only focused on the behaviors, which was really different than how we do things here. So that was shocking.
Where it's really this hard focus on the outward behaviors rather than why. Like, so a kid who sees domestic violence all the time might then go bully kids on the playground, or that's not necessarily a bad kid or negative. It's bad behavior, but it's a result of PTSD and not having the, like, if they're re-experiencing criteria.
Yeah, exactly.
So now someone a bad kid because of the behavior rather than looking at the mechanisms that form that behavior. Absolutely.
And it's hard too because those are the kids that are the loudest, and so they're the ones that get, are seen first, and then labeled the bad kid. And that was essentially what's happening in Nepal with these kids, is like they're looked at as, who cares about these kids? They're just, they're terrible. They're just hurting people. They're stealing. They're, doing drugs at the age of 11. Like, what terrible people. And then, but really, like, there's so much more.
Exactly. Like, no, yeah.
So that was tough. Was just not, obviously the language barrier was so huge that I could only do so much. And that was one thing that we really went over before we went on our international placements, was that like, these organizations don't need to be taking on interns. They're taking on interns for us. Like, this is a learning experience for us. This is not for us to go and save the day and change everything about their organization. It takes more effort for them to take somebody on than to not. And because they had to find us housing, they had to support us. And so knowing that like, it wasn't about me, and so that was hard. It was like, halfway through, it's like, well, what am I even doing? Am I even helping? Am I even doing anything? Or am I just spending time with these kids? And like, but then it's also reminding yourself that like, oh wait, that's also an intervention. Spending time with them is still an intervention.
Real human interactions is
Yeah, exactly. And so, so I learned a lot. I was exposed to a lot of like re-traumatization that was really sad to see and really hard to see. These a lot of the people that worked there weren't even like, I don't even think a lot of them had bachelors in psychology, so they were just I mean, they were doing the best they could
Yeah.
with the knowledge that they had, and it wasn't very much. So that was really hard to see. But it was also like, I mean, the best experience, probably one of the best experiences I'll ever have. It was like,
So cool.
yeah, I mean, it was such a cool place, such cool people. I mean, so supportive. Everybody wanted me to have the best time to see their amazing country, and I was able to do like the most amazing treks on the weekends. So yeah, that was really awesome.
Heck yeah. Was there any like, so that wouldn't be like a project necessarily, but did you have any like projects or anything in graduate school that you were really excited to work on? Or
Yeah, so that one was really cool. And preparing for that, we had like a whole class just to prepare for it. So it was like preparing to work with our partner, preparing to work, in a language that you don't know, and all these different things. But besides that, I really liked psychopathology and taking that class, and we would do the classic describe a character from a movie.
Ooh.
And so I really liked that. I did I think his name's Charlie from Perks of Being a Wallflower. He was, I don't want to spoil it, but for those who have seen it, I diagnosed him with PTSD. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so those were really fun. I did a family therapy project on This Is Us, the show. So that was another really fun one.
That is cool.
Yes, it was a lot of group projects. A lot of them required like us to kind of go out into the community. And so like when we did projects for preparing for Nepal, we had to go to like cultural spots and interview people. And so that was really cool.
Absolutely. Excuse me. There was a question I had along those lines. Man. I have no idea what it was. Okay, well, that's fine. So let's see. How would you describe your first year of being a clinical therapist, and how's it going? What's been most difficult? What's been most rewarding?
Yeah, I'd say it's been really, really, really cool. I feel like I've been like waiting for this day to actually do like actual clinical work for so long, because that's the buzz question, of course, around undergrad is like, well, do you have clinical experience? Do you have clinical experience? So now I can say I do have clinical experience. But it's been, really, really overwhelming. I had like maybe 2 or 3 clients in grad school, and now I have like maybe 45. So it's just really overwhelming, really, really rewarding though. I mean, just, it's really fun. Like I love to take like the little funny things that kids will say to me and just like remember them or tell people about them, or, and so that's really rewarding. And when like, when now that I've been doing it since like September, I feel like I've been with some of my kiddos long enough that I'm seeing a lot of progress. And that has been like, so cool. Seeing some kids that like, a few months ago I was doing safety plans with them, and I was, nervous and anxious about them on the weekends. And now we talk for like 10, 15 minutes and I'm like, okay, see you later. Looks like you're doing fine.
Wow, that has to be super rewarding to know that like someone really is, moving forward.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like you just hear about it so much, and then to actually see like, oh wait, this really does work.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, like, do people that you have helped in previous jobs or even this one like still reach out to you? And
I'm still trying to I'm still kind of figuring that out with as far as like my boundaries and stuff go with that. I don't know. I worked with a few adults. With adult clients, it's pretty inappropriate to like continue that relationship. And so I had one client that she was like my first like real client in grad school, and that was I still think about her probably like on like weekly. She was, we just had such a great connection, and she was so cool. And when we finished, she wrote me like a review, and she was like, I don't know if you're ever gonna have a website or something, like you can put this on there. And it was, I mean, I saved it, of course, and I still read it. And
Yes.
so, yeah. And so I think about those people, but I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, not really. That's a hard part about the job, honestly. I mean, is terminating.
Absolutely. I can imagine. Like, I remember that was the hardest part for me about research, like working with foster youth, homeless youth, juvenile diversion youth, where it was just like, you can't contact me again because then it skews the research because they're all
Yeah.
longitudinal studies. And I'm like, but we bonded.
I know. And it's,
Yeah.
yeah, and knowing that like it wouldn't necessarily be helpful if I were with some of these kids that have some attachment issues. It wouldn't be helpful if I came and went from their life, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's selfishly, like it'd be great to check in and see how they're doing. And but yeah, I mean, you just have to, like, also my professors have always said, like, you start termination the first session.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
I know.
But you just have to start getting ready. You have to prepping them and prepping yourself to get ready for it.
Remind yourself that this is the ultimate goal, right? Like,
exactly.
Get that person out and functioning normally.
Mm-hmm.
So on that, like, what do sessions typically look like for students who see you? What do they kind of come to you for?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. I really like the structure and the way that this job is run. Obviously with teletherapy, it's been very different, but when I'm in the school, so I'm in two schools. One is a middle school, so 6th, 7th, 8th, and then one is a preschool through 8th grade school. So I have my offices in each one. So since I work for the Community Mental Health Center, I work in the schools, but I don't work for the schools. So it's really, it ends up being really independent. I'm kind of like a one-man walking mental health organization. I just, I mean, I come and go when I please, which is the best part. And it's nice because like I can lean on, I have coworkers that are doing the same exact thing as me that I can lean on. And I have coworkers that work at the school that do something different, but still like in the same vein that I can lean on. So that's been really cool. But so yeah, my, the school counselors and the school psychologists and like the support staff, they identify kids at the school that would benefit from therapy. Whether that be like if a kid has had a history of like suicidal ideation or self-harm or trauma. One sec, it's a truck. Cement truck.
It's a truck?
So, what?
That was a truck?
Yeah. It's loud?
That fast.
Okay, he's leaving. So, but yeah, so mostly like the kids that, we call them like the high flyers, the kids that are like in and out of the counseling office all the time. Kids that like have anxiety attacks at school or that are crying at school and stuff. So then once the kids are referred to me by like usually the school counselors, I work really close with the school counselors. I'll reach out to parents and do an intake. So I'll have the parents come in and we'll do like an 1.5-hour meeting of just like full history, previous treatments, family stuff, things like that, current symptoms, current complaints. And then treatment will start after that. So then once treatment starts, I basically just go and grab kids from classes and then I'll walk them back to my office and we'll do kind of like, I don't want to call it play therapy because it's not play therapy, but I do a lot of playing, like games and coloring, and I have like kinetic sand in my office.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so that's what's has been different with teletherapies. It's just not as fun. Like I'm not as like engaged because I can't. There's just not as much to do. So it's a lot more talk therapy, which is harder in some ways.
Mhm.
So, and then I'll check in with families maybe about once a month, depending on like if there's nothing going on, it'll be about once a month. But yeah, parents can call me if they need anything. I really I more support the families and the kid than just the kid. So that's I really like that part about my job.
And what
And
kind of therapy kind of do you use? I don't know if
so I like me personally, or like yeah, me personally, I'm like very relational. So I find that building rapport and like the connection of them wanting to come is what um like when I see benefits from the therapy and stuff. So, and sometimes, I mean, it's like sometimes truthfully, it's because they want to leave class so they can come to me. But then after like the third or fourth session, then it's like, oh, wait, actually, I really do like this time. And so, so yeah, for me, it's like really relational and just like having them, they need like another adult in their corner.
yeah,
And being that for them is, I mean, I just feel like blessed that I get to be that person for them because so many of them, just the population that I work with in Aurora, so many of them, I mean, they are the fifth graders are babysitting their younger siblings and their parents are home a few hours a night. You know, it's just
yeah,
a lot of them don't have anybody to talk to. So I do a lot of, yeah, just like check-ins and um, seeing how things are going like on a day-to-day basis and supporting them.
hmm absolutely. So kind of going back, you kind of mentioned like the kids that are crying or having panic attacks in schools. Is there any other big issues that you usually see with students coming in?
I
Is
would
there
say,
what's the difference between like the younger group and the older group?
yeah, so that's true. I mean, I think that with a lot of the younger kids, like you start to see those over behaviors versus the internal stuff. So like
Which
that's how I'll be identified.
explain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how I'll be identified a client usually with the younger ones is like if they're misbehaving in class. That's how they find those kids. Whereas the middle schoolers, they'll find those kids because those are the kids that are coming into the counseling office, like actually expressing that they need something. So, and yeah, a lot of it, I mean, a lot of it's self-harm and suicidality.
Yeah, that's got to be
So,
really
yeah. So it's a lot of, and then like I do some crisis work, which involves like if one of my kids is feeling suicidal, then having to, you know, make a safety plan, call parents, possibly refer them to a crisis clinic where they can be assessed for, you know, if they're okay or if they need to go to a hospital or something. And so that, you know, when asking about like how my first year of clinical work is going, those have been the hardest things is like, um, I mean, the all day crisis work, because those things, I mean, it takes so long to do all of that.
yeah.
And to check all the boxes that you need to check and to tell the people you need to tell. And so, and then make sure that you're doing it right. And, but then there's never really anybody that tells you like, hey, good job, you did that exactly how you're supposed to do it, because there's really not a,
Not standardized.
yeah, there's not a right way to do it. So so that's been hard, is like, where do I find, like, where can I find my confidence if no one's telling me that I'm
Yeah,
doing well? I have to find it other places.
yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that, I'm sure like it can be mentally, physically draining. So like how do you kind of balance that, like not burning out versus kind of maintaining that self-care, etc.?
Yeah, I think that I am really good at like not working too much. I work and not doing too many sessions. I can probably do about 5 or 6 sessions in person, and then like 4 or 5 over the computer. They're just so much more exhausting. But like knowing that that's my limit and then not doing anything more than that. And like, you know, today was a work day, but I mean, I just was not in a great mental health place this morning. And so I took the day off and I am just not doing sessions. I'm just doing like you know, side clinical work is kind of what I call it, like all the paperwork and catching up on notes and stuff. And so knowing when you can, like, not when you can do that, and being part of a team that lets you do that.
Yeah, and not like pushing yourself, because I mean, again, like, put your own meaning.
Yeah, and it's just not worth it. Like, it's just not worth it to push yourself that much. There's no, like, yeah, I mean, there's just no reward for that. Like, you're not, I think it would be different too. I would be interested if I worked for a organization that I was paid per client and per hour. Like private practice, obviously you're just paid per clinical hours. However, I'm not a salary, and then I just see my clients. So I learned early on, like, it's not gonna make a difference if I'm working that extra day or if I take that day off. Like,
Absolutely.
That doesn't make me weaker. That doesn't make me bad at my job. So being able to do that, and then like being able to go home and not work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, and I think part of that is like being able to set those boundaries of like, and being introspective. Whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. And knowing, like, I mean, there's times that like I put off work for a whole weekend, and yeah, I was a few days behind, but like, oh well.
You're right. Like, you're at least refreshed to do that extra work at that point. Sorry.
Exactly.
So on that, like, kind of moving to this telehealth, I want to get a little bit into that. Like, how do you think this COVID-19 virus is affecting the clients? What are some stresses, maybe both on like you as well as others? And what is it like? You kind of touched on it a little bit here and there, but like working remotely.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, it's been a challenge here and there, but it's also come with, like, you know, the joys of being able to stay home, which is great. I love staying home. So, but I'd say it's been really, really more stress on the parents than on the kids. I think also like the age group that I'm with, the oldest are like 13. So they're still kind of shielded from what's really going on. But like I said, I still check in with parents. And so I've checked in with a lot of parents, and, you know, hearing them, I mean, so many of them have asked me for food resources, food bank information. Luckily, all the schools in Aurora Public Schools, they're doing bagged lunches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, bagged meals. So I can give them that information and stuff, but it's parents that have lost their jobs, who were living paycheck to paycheck. That's been really, really difficult. And I mean, that's another thing that's really hard for me is, like, you know, knowing that there's only so much I can do.
Right.
And I'm not a case manager. And so knowing when does, like, okay, when is this job like crossing the line from clinical to case management, and when do I need to refer this to a case manager, because this is not my job. I can't do this for all my parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's been affecting them. Kids, they've been doing online school for about, I think, 2 weeks now, and I think it's been going okay. Most of my kids just report that they're really lonely and isolated. Especially because if their parents are working, they're just like at home by themselves. So I'd say just like the lack of productivity for them, and lack of, like, I think that's been hurting self-esteem, just because they don't really, like, they're not contributing to anything. So now that school has started up again, I think that might help.
Oh, they've started it up where you are? Or yeah. No, or
online school.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it does help. I definitely, like, I cannot imagine being a teenager right now and like needing like that support is so important, and like being isolated at home would be so difficult.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because like I said, one of my schools is preschool through 8th grade, and so the classes are a lot smaller. There's only, each grade only probably has like 65 kids. So they're doing like Zoom meetings with the whole class, with the whole grade. Whereas my other school, you know, they're doing, if you need to talk to your English teacher, you can talk to them during this time. If you need to talk to your math teacher, you can talk to them during this time. And since it's optional, then almost none of my kids are joining because, you know, they don't know what they need. So, yeah. So I wonder, I'm interested to see how, like, in a few weeks, if that will make a difference of them feeling connected, versus the other school that if they're feeling more isolated.
That'll be very interesting for sure. Let me see. So what do you think are, like, and we kind of talked about this too, like some of the big needs for the underserved populations of adolescents?
I would say a lot of parent resources. They've started to do, like, here in in Aurora, they've done, every time I make like a child abuse report, basically they have 2 routes that it can go down. So if it's like a true, like, child abuse, like someone's intentionally hurting somebody, that's criminal, like that goes down one way, versus lack of resources. And that's why there's like neglect happening at home and endangerment. That's not a bad person. The person doesn't need to be punished. They need help. And so being able to connect those people with, like, parenting classes, parenting resources, support groups for single parents with multiple kids with multiple jobs, like, I think that would be really helpful. And that's what's tough with working with kids, is like a lot of the times, like, it's the parent that needs, a lot of the services, but I'm just going to keep working with the kid. But if the parent isn't changing, then there's only so much we can do.
Exactly. Absolutely. Very cool. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add or go back to before we end?
I would say, like, I think it's just important to assess if clinical work is right for you. There's a lot of jobs that you can get that aren't necessarily clinical, that you can still work with people. I've started suggesting people, if you know you don't want to do grad school, or you're not sure, I've suggested getting bachelors in other things, like, or minors, like in early childhood development, things that, you could be a teacher, you could get a job, more job opportunities, and still go to grad school. I mean, that doesn't stop you from going to grad school at all in psychology.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's something cool.
Absolutely. I will actually ask this, and I've been trying to kind of ask all the guest speakers, like, 1, what is the best advice you've gotten? And 2, what's something you wish you had known earlier?
I think some really good advice that I got was, or that I've, like, for clinical, is just like self-care, and like, you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. And there are people that, just realistically, that do this job for a few years and quit because it's too much. And figuring that out before you spend, $100,000 on grad school would really help. So I think that
experience class is probably really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that, and then as much as I loved my program so much, we just had a Zoom meeting with my coworkers, and it was like a college theme. So everyone talked about where they went to grad school and where they went to undergrad. And everybody was like, yeah, well, I was thinking about going to University of Denver, which is a private school. But, I just didn't know if I wanted to spend all that money. And I kind of knew that, like, once I graduated, I'd be at the same place as everyone else that went to DU. And like me and all the other 10 people that went to DU who have a lot more student loans than they, we're all in the same position now. And like I said, as much as I love my program, I don't think I'd do it any other way. It's important to remember that, like, if you want to work anywhere, you can make any grad school work. You can make, yeah,
Yeah.
as long as it's like if you want to do clinical, as long as it reaches the minimum goals. It could be a private school, one of the top private schools. It could be a
Yeah.
school that has like a 99% acceptance rate. You're gonna
Yeah,
both get clinical. You're gonna both have a clinical degree, and you're both gonna have the same job.
exactly. I think that is really important because people get so hung up on like the name or recognition of a school, and ultimately like people have gone to that school and are working.
Well, and Cassie, this is super interesting. In in undergrad, just talking to my roommate. In undergrad, we always hear about like professional schools and professional psychology schools, and like they can definitely have a connotation that isn't super positive sometimes. And then we got a new CEO of our organization, and she went to American University, a professional psychology school, and she's now the CEO of Aurora Mental Health, like a huge mental health organization. And she has completely, changed our whole organization around for the better. Um, so, and that was my own stigma that I held about a school because of the name.
Mm-hmm.
And she's now, yeah,
Yeah.
I look up to her so much. I think she's like the coolest person ever. So,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think it's about, again, where you go and more about what you make of your experience and how you network. Like if you have a network and you're doing, like taking full advantage of the opportunities that are given to you throughout your program, you're going to be fine. If you passively go, the truck. But yeah, if you're just passively going to get a degree, like that's when a school will make a difference, right?
Yeah, as long as it has like the bare bones of what it needs, like if you're doing a clinical program, if you're doing a PhD or a PsyD, as long as it's accredited.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As long as it's accredited, and like you've done enough research into people are getting licensed from that program, it could, we have multiple people that I work with that went to professional schools that have the same name in every city. And whatever, they're probably, some of them have more experience than me and they're making even more than me.
Yeah.
So
All about what you do.
mm-hmm.
What was I going to say? Oh, and then if students are interested, can I share your contact?
Send them. Yeah, you can give them the Gmail that you have for me.
Perfect. Cool.
Yeah, and if anybody, I'd say my strengths or things that people can ask me about are like grad school, international work. If people are interested in that, it's a really, really hard world to infiltrate, is what I've heard. I have not officially infiltrated the international development world yet, but one day. And just like deciding if you want like getting into clinical work or not.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Blair. I know students are going to be really excited about this.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions. That was so nice.
Those were great questions that we got this time. So I appreciate you as students participating in this as well. And I hope you enjoyed this interview. So stay dry. Bye. Okay.